Can India navigate the era of war? Because remember, the Middle Eastern airspace, many point out, is not safe anymore. Various Indian airlines have suspended their flight operations to Israel, including Air India. Prominent airlines are also now reworking their flight paths to Europe as well. So there are, there's a major fallout of the escalation and tensions in West Asia as well. But we will focus on India's diplomatic strategy going forward. But first, let's take a look at this report encapsulating how this unfolded on the ground in West Asia and what lies ahead.
The biggest attack by ballistic, cruise missiles and drones in military history. Almost completely absorbed by Israel's defensive shield. Damage on the ground limited, with no loss of life reported so far. This retaliatory attack marks the first time Iran has targeted Israel directly from its own soil, and comes 13 days after it alleged that Tel Aviv had destroyed its consulate in Damascus. US President Joe Biden has said that US forces played a significant role in helping to intercept the drones and missiles.
Mr. President, are American troops at risk as well?
Significantly, Iran has now indicated that it does not want to escalate the conflict.
این عملیات از نظر ما خاتمه یافته است و قصدی بر ادامه این عملیات وجود نداره، اما چنانچه رژیم صهیونیستی اقدامی رو علیه جمهوری اسلامی ایران چه در خاک ما و چه در مراکز متعلق به ما در کشور سوریه یا جای دیگری انجام بده، عملیات بعدی ما بسیار بزرگتر از این انجام خواهد شد.
Israel though says that the confrontation with Iran was not over yet, but has not directly stated that it will respond with missile or airstrikes of its own.
המערכה הזאת עדיין לא הסתיימה. אנחנו צריכים להיות ערניים וקשובים להנחיות צה"ל, להוראות פיקוד העורף ולהיערך לכל תרחיש. יחד עם זה, את הגל המשמעותי ביותר, הראשון, בלמנו ועשינו את זה בהצלחה גדולה.
Iran and Israel have been at loggerheads for decades. Tehran has long been backed by armed groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah around the region that target Israel.
This is an unprecedented attack by the Islamic Republic of Iran on the state of Israel. Multiple thresholds have been crossed here that have not been crossed before. I think it is correct to say that we're going to be looking at a new Middle East in the future.
Meanwhile, the impact is likely to be felt on global crude oil prices as well.
The first part is if it does subside and there's no, in the sense of that geopolitical hotspot and all of that tension, then one would say that the market may look at a $3 or $4 rise to the upside as far as a premium, and then it might just evaporate out. But if there was to be some form of retaliation, as Israel possibly is entitled to do, then that could change the total landscape in the sense of supply, the disruptions through the Strait of Hormuz, and all the impact that that would cause globally to energy prices, which could certainly ramp up significantly from here.
India has expressed its concerns about the conflict and called for an immediate escalation. According to reports, there are more than 18,000 Indian citizens in Israel. The attack has mostly been received positively by the public in Iran, as hundreds rallied in support of it. On the other hand, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said soon after the attack that Israel will win. All eyes will now be on Netanyahu as to how or when he chooses to respond. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV.
And joining me, we have a very special panel on Left, Right and Centre tonight. I'm being joined by Prabhu Dayal, former Deputy Ambassador to Iran as well. Also with me, Raymond Vickery, ex-US Assistant Secretary of Commerce and a Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Vadvani Chair in Washington, D.C. Also with me, Satara Siddiqui, who's a senior journalist from Iran and also a scholar at the American Studies University of Tehran. I'm also being joined by Tammy Ben-Haim, who is the Consul General of Israel to South India. Thanks all very much for joining us on Left, Right and Centre tonight. Going across to you first, Mr. Prabhu Dayal. How do you look at this unprecedented escalation in the conflict, and how do you look at India's diplomatic strategy now going forward? It's a crucial year. There are elections across the world, elections in India, of course. We are in peak election season right now. How do you see India navigating this era of war?
Well, Vedant, thanks for having me on your show. Let me mention at the outset that India has called for an immediate de-escalation and a return to the path of diplomacy. Now, India is friendly with both Israel and Iran, and it has all along been able to balance its relationship with both of them. Now, India's position that there should be an immediate de-escalation and a return to the path of diplomacy is in line with its national interests. A potential escalation could impact India directly on 3 counts, at least 3 counts. And these are its people in the region, its economic interests, and its vital strategic needs. Now, let me briefly elaborate.
Yes.
Firstly, there are about 18,000 Indians in Israel, as your reporter mentioned a while back, and also about 5 to 10,000 Indians in Iran. More significantly, there are about 90 lakh Indians, or about 9 million Indians, living and working in the Gulf and the West Asian region. So any conflict that expands will end up posing a risk to the Indian community that is based in this region.
Yes.
Now, secondly, India's economic interests are tied to energy security.
Yes.
The West Asian region contributes to about 80% of India's oil and gas supplies. And a potential conflict could impact this.
Okay.
So India has been able to minimize the impact of oil prices on account of the Russia-Ukraine war by various means. But if there is a conflict in this Middle East region or the West Asian region, there will be an adverse impact on energy prices, and
Absolutely.
this will hit us.
And we've seen that in the past as well, Ambassador, that crude prices have been impacted. And thanks very much for summing that up, because that's how high the stakes are. But let me get Ms. Tammy Benheim on this, because Iran has now said that the attack is over. Do you expect an escalation in the conflict going forward now?
Listen, we'll just tell your viewers, Iran in the night between the 13th and the 14th of April had over 370 UAVs, ballistic and cruise missiles, and rockets shot at Israel from its own land, from its own country. It's the first time in tens of years, or the first time ever, that Iran is doing it from its own soil. But the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guards have been saying for those same decades that their intent is to destroy the state of Israel. And they've been doing it for all these years, for 45 years, through their proxies in the region that we're at war with at the moment, whether it's Hezbollah from the north or Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen. And I guess we saw that they figured it's not happening. They're trying to ruin the state of Israel. They're trying to cause instability in the Middle East. They're trying to bring all the powers into war. And this is the first time, as I said, in 45 years that they've done it from their own territory, taking full responsibility for this awful act that they have committed. Is it the end? Is it not? We're dealing with people who are intent on destroying, on intent of devastating us. We can all hope and pray, but we don't know if that is the end. I don't know if we can put ourselves in the place of this regime and know if it's the end or not.
Okay, let me get in Satara Siddiqui on that. Ms. Siddiqui, do you think that now perhaps a regional war is inevitable, and this may have triggered a wider regional war in West Asia? Because war is not good for anyone, no matter which side you're on. the kind of devastation that the Israel-Hamas war has unleashed, it's absolutely unimaginable. The number of people who've been killed, on the ground in Gaza, and of course, other than that, how it's sort of crippled the global economy as well. But in Iran, what is the sort of understanding of this unprecedented attack?
Let me first make it clear that the Iranian officials have never said that they want to destroy the state of Israel. What they have actually said is that the apartheid regime in Israel will come to an end. And this is exactly because, or for the same reason, that the apartheid regime in South Africa came to an end. Nobody destroyed it, but the people inside South Africa brought an end to the apartheid regime in that country. And that for the same reason, for all the aggression that the Israeli apartheid regime has been exerting against not only Palestinians, but also Syrians, Lebanese, Iraqis, Iranians, and using up U.S. taxpayers' money to create wars and threats inside the region, the people of the world are going to oppose it. As we can see, it is Israel that is carrying a genocide against the Palestinians. It is Israel that has attacked Iran on several occasions, and it's Israel that has assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists, Iranian generals, and this was the attack on Iranian embassy on.
But Ms. Sadiqi, many
Syria.
would turn around and say that Iran's tacit support to militia like the Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Hamas, that has also sort of unleashed devastation across the world. We of course are aware of the Red Sea attacks. We are aware of what has happened in various parts of West Asia.
Whatever Iran has done has so far and always in the history of Iran been in retaliation and response to what it has received. Iran has never attacked any country, any nation, and it has never started any war. And this is basically very clear for anyone who knows history and can read online or history books, that Iran has never attacked any country. And Iran has actually practiced a lot of composure and waited for very long. And Iran even offered Israel to practice, to exert or start a ceasefire in Gaza, in exchange for in exchange for no response from Iran, or no military response from Iran.
Let me get in Mr. Raymond Vickery on that. Mr. Vickery, many would say that the US now is best positioned to be a mediator, to be a negotiator in times of unprecedented conflict. Going forward, of course, the US has said that its support to Israel is ironclad, but how does the US plan to be a key player in peace? Because, that's what we need at the moment. We cannot afford a regional war.
Well, thanks for having me. And I think it's up to two great democracies, India and the US, to step in and to wage peace as much as others want to wage war. Prime Minister Modi has said this is not an age of war.
Yes.
Said that to President Putin, and that applies across the board. I do not think that escalation is inevitable if indeed the United States, India, and other democracies can work together. There's plenty of blame to go around on both sides, but the idea that Iran has been peaceful and has not been using proxies across the Middle East to increase war and intentions is just wrong. So what has to happen now is to look at the situation and see what India and the U.S. And other like-minded democracies can do to de-escalate. I do think that the response from Iran has not been such as to provoke a wider war. In fact, the United Nations delegation from Iran has said they don't want the U.S. to be involved, that this is taken care of, and it's up to Israel as to whether they'll make another move.
Yes.
I think we have to get back and focus on the basics and try to bring peace to the region, including in regard to Gaza. And India is perfectly situated, as has been
Yes.
said before,
And
because it has ties to all.
you made an important point there that we need to work for peace, not for war. But many would turn around and say that the US is putting its own interests before larger interests of peace in the region and indeed the entire world, whether it was vetoing resolutions on a ceasefire in Gaza, or putting out this sort of explicit support for Israel as well. In such a scenario, in what many would call a diplomatic tightrope, how do you see countries like the US, backing peace before national interests?
Well, I think the U.S. Has to re-examine its relationship in terms of providing arms in regard to the Gaza situation. I think that that's going on now. And I'm not going to say the United States is doing everything correctly.
Yes.
But it's up to democracies to try to work through these problems. The United States has to do differently in some ways to bring about a two-state solution. Can't just talk about it. But India can be a key part of that. India has ties with Iran, with Israel, with Russia that the United States doesn't necessarily have. So I think you can work together on it.
Okay, Ambassador Dayal, would you like to come in on that? How can India perhaps be, does India also need to re-examine its diplomatic policy vis-a-vis the conflict? And how can India perhaps be a more strong proponent of world peace?
Well, let me mention that, first of all, India has invested a lot in building strategic relationships with major Arab countries, with Israel, and also with Iran. And this is because India sees the region of West Asia as its extended neighborhood. Let me remind you that India has been working with countries in the Middle East to set up the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor. And this could have great strategic and economic benefits, not just for India, but for the entire region. Now, the conflict would undo all the good work that has been done. And in fact, it would put everything way back from to where we have been able to bring things. So we have a vital stake in establishing peace and preventing de-escalation. However, the danger of escalation does lurk in the background. We cannot deny it. The Iranians perhaps don't want an escalation, and that is why they have been at pains to say that the attack is from their side is over, and that they are not mulling a counterattack. Their attack on Israel was somewhat calibrated. But significantly, as you pointed out, the Israelis are mulling over a counterattack, and it's important, not just for countries like India and the United States, but everybody to work together to make sure that there is no escalation and that, in fact, there is de-escalation and
as you say, as you point out, Ambassador Dayal, now perhaps the ball is in Israel's court, and let me get Tammy Manheim on that. Israel's response was very interesting and important. It said that they're not against the people of Iran, they're against the Republic of the Islamic State. What is going to be the Netanyahu government strategy now going forward?
Yes, you're right, but the body responsible for escalating these tensions are the Revolutionary Guard, is the Iranian regime. They're the ones who for years, and we feel it since the massacre of October 7th directly in Israel, but they are the ones who are supplying with weapons, supplying with money, training, and radicalizing these militant terrorist groups in the region. They're just now doing it directly as well. And their goal is one, and if somebody didn't believe them until today, people should start believing them, the same as maybe people didn't understand that Hamas wanted to destroy us. Again, an Iranian proxy. Now the Iranian regime is doing it directly. Look, our security cabinet is holding talks, of course, and our prime minister and Netanyahu and everybody is, of course, on top and dealing with this situation since it had begun. Israel, with its amazing aerial defense system, which was built in collaboration with the United States, our strongest and biggest ally, and with other allies from the EU and other countries, this system, this aerial system that we have of protection has proven itself tonight. In any other circumstances, just let me one word, and then any other circumstances, 370 UAVs and rockets shot at Israel, or at any country, by the way, would have caused much more severe damage. I don't even want to think about it. But thank God for our aerial system, and thank, the Israeli military and our allies that they were able to intercede over 90% of these rockets shot. And this is why we're not hearing today of more damage and of more human lives lost.
Okay, Sadara Siddiqui, you heard that. Your response to that, because as Tammy Benheim points out, the onus is on Iran, and perhaps it's because of Iran's decades of policies that we have come to this stage where differences are almost irreconcilable now.
I'm sorry to say, but this is a very ignorant framing of what has been happening in the region. The apartheid regime in Israel has been occupying Palestine for 75 years. The regime has been called apartheid by the UN and by nations across the world. And if we are turning a blind eye to the genocide that is happening in Gaza by the Israeli military and the thousands and thousands of innocent Palestinians that have been killed, and talk about Hamas, and we know how Israel and mainstream media fabricated all the numbers of the so-called casualties, and gradually over time we realize how Israel has been trying to frame the genocide for its own interests and faking numbers without understanding the historical background, without understanding how Israel has taken pride in assassinating Iranian nuclear scientists. Israel has supported and proudly declared that it has trained back during the Bush administration, the Mossad and Israeli regime trained MEK terrorists to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists. So whatever you're seeing, as I said, is a response to what Iran has been receiving in forms of threats, war, sanctions, and everything. And by the way, Iran has not violated any international law, but Israel has been occupying lands. Israel has been violating international law. Okay. The U.S. also, these democracies that we're talking about, the U.S. is occupying Syrian land. Israel is occupying Palestinian land. So these democracies have violated international law. They do possess nuclear weapons, okay, but Iran has never...
Let me get in Mr. Raymond Vickery on that. Mr. Vickery, your response, and also I always ask this of American diplomats. Do you think this is a failure of diplomacy, that we have come down to such a state in international affairs? You have two big wars raging on. Of course, the Ukraine war is still very much raging. It's still killing people. It's still destroying property. In Gaza, of course, what we are seeing on ground is unimaginable. The number of women, children and men that have been killed in Gaza. Do you think it's a failure of world leaders and diplomacy at large?
Well, it's no question that there's a failure in regard to humankind, really, in its ability to have a rule of law and a peaceful approach after World War II, where we killed worldwide 60 million people. It makes this pale by comparison. And if you have a World War III, it's going to make the World War II look like a walk in the park. So yes, there's a failure. There's no question about that. But the way forward is not for everybody to do, as has been suggested, to say, oh, I'm all right, everybody else is wrong, and therefore I'm justified in escalating the situation. That's not the way forward. The way forward is to look for a way out so that people can live in peace and turn to things of economic development, the things that really count to the common man and woman. And that's what India and the United States have in common, and that's what our reasons for being are. And it's time for other nations to step back and re-examine in Iran, in Israel, and across the board what they're doing to be able to promote that kind of vision. At this point, you have a generation such as we had in the 1930s, which led to a conflagration. And that's what we're trying to prevent, and that's what we ought to do.
Mr. Vickery, thanks very much for summing that up. And you're right, of course, it's not just a failure of diplomacy, a failure to humankind, because, of course, as the Prime Minister has also said, this is not an era of war. Thanks all very much for joining.